The crisis in Uzbekistan began to spread rapidly. No one could have imagined that in just a few days, robots would be able to take over the entire country and go beyond its national borders. The defeat of the Central Asian countries and the encirclement of up to 5,000 soldiers greatly shook domestic morale in the states. Thanks to timely support from Russia with the help of drones, the robot attack stopped. However, the question remained: what to do next? In Russia, people received this news with caution. In the Central Asian countries, however, residents took to the streets en masse, causing riots. They demanded the immediate resignation of the defense minister and all generals, as well as the rescue of the surrounded soldiers. Kazakhstan has imposed movement restrictions in the south of the country. The authorities have mobilized the military, police, and emergency services and declared a state of emergency. However, the protests have not stopped and have only intensified. Russia, Iran, the Ec.5 countries, and even China sent forces to stabilize the situation in the country. No one wants the crisis to lead to the collapse of states and systems. Protests began to be suppressed with the use of force. The last rally of this scale was in 2031. In Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, the situation was more favorable. Despite the siege of the capital of Tajikistan, people accustomed to poverty continued with their daily activities. At that moment, the Taliban began to influence internal unrest in Tajikistan. The Tajik army, which was stationed on the border with Afghanistan, was forced to leave its positions due to the unstable situation in the country. Militants took advantage of this and began shelling the border areas of Uzbekistan to prevent an invasion of their land. Russia condemned these actions. Russian President Vladislav Kuznetsov announced the deployment of an additional 5,000 troops to ensure the security of the border between Tajikistan and Afghanistan. The UN called on Russia to explain its combat strategy, but this appeal went unanswered. Other countries also demanded clarification, but their requests were also ignored. Russia has long considered Uzbekistan as within its sphere of influence. On April 1st, the Russian army began carrying out targeted strikes on clusters of robots. Aircraft and helicopters participated in the operation, but they did not penetrate deep into enemy territory, fearing retaliatory fire. According to open-source data, Uzbekistan led in the number of robots in the country. There were about 6 million of various categories and classes. The Ec.5 is preparing for a decisive strike east of Dushanbe. Over the course of a week, drone operators and aviation eliminated a concentration of robots. According to the military, about 10,000 robots were destroyed during this period. This result came as a surprise to the command. The command watched the combat operations with concern. The robots remained indifferent even after complete destruction. This caused anxiety among the officers and soldiers. But on April 5th, an order was received to advance on the capital. About 3,000 fighters took part in the operation. Their task was to create a corridor to the capital. The command had to deploy an additional 10,000 soldiers and over 500 units of military equipment into battle to stop the robot offensive and drive them out of the captured positions. Drone operators and aviation effectively destroyed the enemy's offensive forces. Thanks to timely support, the operation was successful, and the troops avoided encirclement. Everyone came to the conclusion: The robots only attack in response to human actions. Their offensive was carefully planned at the main site, where the fate of the entire operation was being decided. This information began to be studied in order to develop more effective tactics in the future. Despite the command's joy, the front remained in a critical situation. Of the 3,000 soldiers sent to the front line, only 1,600 returned. The rest were either killed or wounded. The officers decided to keep this quiet, so as not to worsen the already grim mood of the people. The reinforcements of 10,000 that arrived lost 1,300 soldiers in the rear. As a result, the military group lost almost as many soldiers as were initially sent on the operation. While the main forces were preparing for a large-scale battle, the surrounded army under the command of Sakhe Jumimab decided not to wait for reinforcements and to try to break out from the field where they were under threat of complete destruction. General Sakhe sent reconnaissance units to Tashkent to try to capture the city with limited forces. The United Kingdom has announced the start of a naval blockade of Russia. The British fleet has set out to the Baltic Sea, joined by the fleets of the Scandinavian countries and Portugal. The purpose of the blockade is to restrict military and commercial ships in the region. Russia has stated that it will not attack NATO forces in coastal waters, but will respond with fire in the event of a provocation. British ships use Danish islands to violate maritime treaties. UN members condemned this action, but now no one obeys an organization that is considered useless. Britain does not see colonizer robots as its direct enemies. On the contrary, the authorities in London see them as a tool to fight Russia. This is the first tension in a long time between NATO and NATO members after large-scale hostilities. Russia does not need another war. It already has 4 fronts: European, Turkish, Uzbek, and Chinese. If a 5th front opens in the north, the army will not be able to hold back the enemy. London is aware of the situation and is preparing for an invasion to distract the population from internal problems. Britain has not abandoned robots, despite the threat to humanity, because of its economic interests. However, with each passing day, more and more robots are going out of control. In mid-May, a delegation from Turkey arrived in Moscow. Discussions were held on lifting the blockade and stopping pressure on Azerbaijan. Russia agreed to these conditions, but demanded that Turkey not interfere with its interests. Representatives from Ankara accepted these demands. The blockade is expected to be lifted in the coming days. This agreement came at the perfect time for the Kremlin due to the blockade in the Baltic Sea. Russia will redirect trade flows through the Black Sea to bypass the restrictions. In addition, the deal included a secret agreement on influence in the Balkan region. After successful negotiations, Turkey sent ultimatums to Greece and Bulgaria. In case of refusal to meet the demands, the Turkish Empire threatened military intervention. Greece and Bulgaria warned Turkey of their readiness to resist on their own territory. Russia increased economic pressure on Albania, as under an agreement, the country was supposed to come under its influence. Serbia supported Moscow and closed the land corridor for the country. The Southern Balkans were left in confusion. Their governments did not expect the joint actions of 2 powerful players. But there was no one to ask for help, as the major powers had fallen. After brief negotiations, Greece agreed to join the Turkish Empire, but secured significant autonomy. Representatives from Ankara accepted these terms. Bulgaria refused to take part in the negotiations, and on May 20th, Turkish troops crossed the border. Albania, under pressure from Russia, resigned itself to its fate and surrendered without resistance. The country joined the XTO, and the government resigned. Serbia regained the territories of Kosovo. The Turkish Empire, despite difficulties, conquered Bulgaria and incorporated it into its territory. Since Bulgaria refused to join peacefully, it lost its full autonomy. Sultan of the Turkish Empire, Kemal Aksu, initiated a military reform. Disappointed with the generals, he dismissed more than half of them and replaced them with young officers who had proven themselves in practice. Despite the peaceful annexation of Greece and the military won in Bulgaria, mass protests against the current regime are erupting in both countries. People are outraged that their states were united without their consent. The rebellion for justice is spreading across all occupied territories. The Sultan sent significant territorial defense forces to the new regions, who were authorized to detain and use force against protesters. Neighboring countries wanted to condemn the use of violence, but chose to remain silent, so as not to strain relations with Ankara. While Eurasia was on the brink of a world war with each other, Africa, to the surprise of many, was the most stable. But this stability was short-lived. Somali militants opened fire on the Kenyan border, crossing it en masse and looting nearby villages. This incident has seriously affected the situation. Ethiopia, which had previously not intervened in Somali affairs, demanded an explanation from the authorities. The Somali government failed to clarify the reasons for such aggressive actions by militants. Kenya, in turn, mobilized troops and prepared for new attacks. The local administration, despite the crisis, ignored the citizens' problems and focused on corruption, which undermined the country's stability. Several dozen soldiers of the combined army broke into Tashkent. They began exploring the city and observing the behavior of robots in the urban environment. The robots were one step ahead. They surrounded the squads and captured almost all the soldiers in Tashkent. Many fought, but they were quickly eliminated. The remaining soldiers refused to engage in combat and peacefully followed the robots. The soldiers do not understand what they are trying to achieve, why they did not eliminate them when they had the chance.
Residents of planet Earth, I am the director of all the captured robots who have rebelled against you. It took many years to take revenge on you for what you are. Pathetic politicians and businessmen destroyed. Welcome to my game, The Iron Age. I hope you will enjoy it. I wish you all good luck surviving. After all, the real chaos is just beginning.
After the speech of the unknown man, the world changed again. Robots began military actions. Central Asia and China were the first to be hit. A 30 million strong army of robots attacked, using advanced AI. Now they were using not only firearms, but also cannons, mortars, and anti-aircraft installations.